always do that. I gotta change the thumbnail. It always puts the wrong thumbnail. There we go. Okay, guys. Let me do a sound test real quick. Okay, guys. Let me do a sound test real quick. Okay, guys. Let me do a sound test real quick. Okay. I need to turn up the microphone. So bear with me. This is basically a new build. You gotta get all the settings for audio set up. Oh yeah, the audio was way off. There we go. That should be a lot better. Yeah, the audio was way off. There we go. That should be a lot better. Okay. Yeah, all right, guys. So it's Ryzen launch week. We're at that time of the year where a lot of hardware releases are going to start coming out back to back. So for those wondering, so Ryzen 7000 series, aka Zen 4, AM5, and the X670E chipset motherboards all launched this past Tuesday. The other big thing that happened this week was Intel Innovation, which was Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, where they announced the Intel Arc GPUs, so the A770 limited edition and the A750 limited edition will be on store shelves, I believe, on October 12th. So not that much longer to wait if you've been holding out for those for a while. I know I've been waiting pretty much all year for that GPU to come out. So I will be picking up the Arc A770. I plan to run that in two different systems. I'm going to test it with the way that Tom Peterson and Ryan Shrout kind of want you to test it, which is basically with the existing Intel 12th Gen Alder Lake system. So I have a 12700K that I can pair that up with. But I'm also very curious to pair up the Arc A770 with this brand new Ryzen 9 7950X that I've got right here. Well, it's actually in the system that we're streaming on right now. It's paired up with G-Skill Flare X. So we have a Flare X5 kit from G-Skill. This was compliments of Micro Center. So for those that live near a Micro Center, as you can see on the website, I've got it pulled up right here on the stream because I do want to point out that they are doing a free promotional giveaway where you get 32 gigabytes, basically this exact memory kit that I'm using. You get 32 gigabytes of DDR5 5600. It's not super amazing RAM. It's kind of like it's the lowest spec for G-Skill's Expo approved memory. So it's CL36, I believe. So 3636 3689 are the timings, the primary timings. And yeah, that's a $250 value that if you buy a Ryzen 7 or a Ryzen 9, you basically get the Flare X5 memory for free at Micro Center. So all you gotta do is purchase a Ryzen 7 or a Ryzen 9. So once again, it does not accompany a Ryzen 5 purchase. So unfortunately, those that were looking at the 7600X, that doesn't apply here. But for the 7700X and above, you basically get very good RAM with that. So originally on day one, I was running a pair of G-Skill Ripjaws S5, which I had picked up a week before the launch. This is a 64 gig kit, so this is two 32 gig DIMMs. And it works fine. Everything runs, like it posts and everything. What I noticed is that the post times on the current latest BIOS that I'm running from Gigabyte. So for those wondering, I am running a Gigabyte Aorus Master. So I picked up this board over at Micro Center on Tuesday, along with the Ryzen 9. So I was running a 64 gig kit in the system, and it works fine. The only thing is the post times are really long. It's like 45. I timed it. It's like on average about 45 seconds for the post, and then an additional, like 10 to 15 seconds to boot into Windows after the post beep. So, you know, you're looking at like a minute roughly from, if you're cold booting the system, it's like a minute to start up. But if you put the computer to sleep and you come back, it wakes up really fast. So there's nothing wrong there. Although Gigabyte in particular, I think there's a UEFI bug where the S3 resume boot file gets lost or something like that. But you're able to restore from sleep just fine. It's just I've been running into some kind of strange issues where my AverMedia capture card in the X4 slot doesn't wake up, or it doesn't enumerate when waking from sleep. You have to basically restart the computer, or you have to cold boot the computer to get it to come back. So that's really annoying. Those are kind of the struggles of being an early adopter, I would say. So I expect that to get resolved over the coming weeks, maybe a couple of months. Hopefully it's not too long to wait. I have reported it to them. I've opened a ticket, and I don't think they've replied yet. But I'm pretty sure they're aware of it. So that's what it's like being an early adopter. So those are the sort of things for people who are on the fence. If you want to just kind of sidestep all of these sort of teething issues, just like what we saw last year with Alder Lake's launch, where, you know, certain DDR5, trying to run like high-speed DDR5 on 4 DIMMs wasn't really a thing at Alder Lake's launch. And there was some stability issues where like games could randomly crash. I know I ran into an issue with Endwalker on my Alder Lake system last year, where after playing the game for like 5 hours, it would just randomly crash. And that's running it with DDR4. So, but those are the sort of things, right? Like that's what you expect when you're an early adopter. You kind of have to be more open-minded when it comes to these sort of expected like hiccups, I guess, in a launch of a product. So yeah, I would say overall, the Zen 4 launch was not as smooth as it could have been. Definitely, I think that Ryzen or Zen 3 back in 2020, the Ryzen 5000 series had a much smoother launch. I think that product, when it came out, was far more refined, and I think part of that was that they didn't really change the motherboards. Like you could actually just update the BIOS on an X570 board and it would work. And I think at launch, really, I think it was just the revised X570S chipsets which were shipping with Ryzen 5000. So I know I didn't have to change my motherboard when I did get a 5800X. But yeah, I mean, overall, I would say that if you're somebody who's an enthusiast and you're on a computer that's, you know, like 3 years old or more, basically something from like Zen 2 or older, I really think it's worth looking into. Alternatively, I do still think that the 5800X3D is an amazing CPU. I think that's going to go down in the history books as one of the greats alongside the GTX 1080 Ti. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much all I had to say in terms of the actual launch. In terms of I guess the chipset, or I guess the motherboards, right? I think the main thing that kind of hurt this launch sort of was the fact that, you know, the motherboards were very expensive. So X670E, really expensive at launch. You know, the Ace, basically you had the Trio, you had like the Crosshair, although this is the Extreme. I guess we should have looked up the Crosshair Hero, because that's pretty much more what we were looking for here. But essentially you had the big three, so plus the Taichi. I guess we should say the big four, right? Like the enthusiasts pretty much know by now all the main motherboards and their names. Like they all kind of have names, right? So if we're talking about Asus, you have the Crosshair. Crosshair is kind of synonymous with AMD, like the enthusiast class AMD chipset motherboard from Asus. If we're talking about MSI, MSI has kind of changed, but typically, if those who remember the days of X570, you know, the Ace was kind of right there as the rival to the Crosshair. And I think before that, it was the X-Power, but the X-Power wasn't really exclusive to the AMD line. It was also shared with Intel, and I kind of went away with that. And kind of the Ace is now kind of the main, you know, I don't want to say flagship because there's the Godlike, but in terms of the one that people would actually buy, The Ace has always been the one from MSI that I think has kind of captured the market in terms of what the upper range of what typical consumers would purchase when they're buying a high-end motherboard. I think this is kind of where it's at. Anything beyond the Ace is kind of outside of a normal person's purchasing power, I would say, even if you're an enthusiast, right? I don't really see a lot of enthusiasts going above the Ace or the Crosshair Hero or the Aorus Extreme or the Aorus Master. So speaking of Aorus, so Gigabyte, the Aorus Master is typically the rival of the Crosshair Hero or the MSI Meg Ace. So those are the kind of the three. I see them as like the three rivals, and then of course ASRock has the Tai Chi motherboard, which is like a good alternative to those three. ASRock has always been very, very interesting. Like they've always kind of sort of done their own thing, which is kind of different from what the others do. Like when I think of Asus, I think of really, really expensive, overpriced motherboards that have over-the-top RGB. They are good. Like they're not. It's not like they're bad. They're very good overall. But I just think they're. I mean, you're paying a lot for essentially LEDs and a lot of bling. So, in terms of functionality, yes, they do some interesting things like the Gen Z DIMM.2 card that they have for the PCIe mounted vertically and stuff like that. Asus was also the first one to come up with the detachable GPU, the PCIe release button. So they were the proponents of that. They were also the first ones to come out with the shroud for the I/O. So I do consider Asus as the innovator. I think that they're the ones that tend to come up with the most unique designs that are aesthetically good in terms of the looks. So presentation-wise, I do think Asus has got it done right. But overall, I think for the average consumer, they've just kind of almost priced themselves out of the market over the last several years now. Where I think like it used to be, a Crosshair from Asus. Like if we go back to Ryzen 1, right, the Crosshair 6 Hero, so the X370 was like a $240 motherboard. I think with Wi-Fi it was like $260 or something, and that was kind of the most expensive one. They did release the Extreme, but I don't even think that was. I think that was still less than $300. Maybe that was like $299 or something. But yeah, think about that and look at where we are today with the Crosshair X670E Extreme, which is basically $1,000. So that's a lot of money, right? And it's an EATX. It's good. And honestly, if I was looking at Asus boards, really the only one that meets my use cases is the Extreme. As unfortunate as that sounds, the Crosshair Extreme is really the only one that meets the requirements for what I actually do and what I need. It's very unfortunate, and I would have considered them had the Hero have actually had the x4 slot down here at the bottom for a capture card. It's like with the Hero, I'd have to run my capture card off of the second X16 slot, but then that's gonna basically cut my GPU lanes down to 8 for an 8x8 split between the two slots, and I don't really want to do that if necessary. So I feel like Asus is, they've gone with USB 4, which is nice. The Crosshair Extreme has the 10 gigabit LAN, so they do have a lot of bells and whistles that are really, really good for very, very, very specific users, though. But in my case, I don't need 10 gig LAN. I do need the x4 PCIe slot, though, so that is something that I need. And I think the only other board that they have that would fit my needs is the ProArt Creator. But the problem with that board is it doesn't have a post code, and it's $500, and it doesn't have a debug LED. That's just it just doesn't seem right to me. Like, there's just, on principle, this doesn't seem right. So really, the Extreme is the only really good one they have in terms of hitting all the checkboxes in the right form factor. You've got the x4, you've got USB 4, you have your front panel USB 3, you've got like your 3.2 You have the debug code, you have the buttons on the motherboard, you have the flashback on the back, the clear CMOS on the back. So it does get everything done, right? But it's just very, very expensive. It's $1,000 for what I think should have been like this should have been the price of the Crosshair. This should have been like no more than 800. This would be like 700, 800. But you know, I'm surprised that it's actually only 1,000 because I kind of thought it would be more. So what do you guys think? Does anybody in the chat think that Asus is kind of are they worth it? Because I'll tell you how my launch experience was. So on Tuesday, I got up, I went to Micro Center. Now I did not get up and like wait hours in line or anything like that. No, there was none of that. Like I just went to Micro Center normally in the morning because they did open up early. I showed up, I went in, there was no line, there weren't even a lot of customers in the store. It was pretty easy. I just talked to the sales associate. You know, I said, do you guys have, my first question was, do you have the Ace? Because this is the motherboard that I actually think is worth getting. This is the best one overall. It's very, very expensive, but it basically hits all the check boxes and doesn't really do anything wrong besides just being super, super overpriced. So this is the one that I was looking at. This is like the premier motherboard. Like if you're an AMD fanboy, if you're an enthusiast, if you're upgrading from like an ancient Haswell or Sandy Bridge or God forbid FX8350 bulldozers or Vicheras, any of those old CPUs, if you're upgrading and you're going to spend a ton of money and you're going to bypass Threadripper and all the other stuff that is out there right now from AMD and Intel, this would be the board to sink your money into, in my mind, because I think this one is the most solid board in terms of it. There isn't really anything wrong with it, with the only exception being that it doesn't have Thunderbolt support at all. I think, let me just double check so I don't misspeak, but I don't think it has USB 4 either. I'm just checking right now, I'm checking my notes to make sure. Yeah, so none of the MSI boards, so the unique thing about MSI is, in my mind, they have the best lineup for gamers, but they're kind of like in a unique, weird spot for like a creator, because they don't have any USB 4, they don't have any Thunderbolt headers or Thunderbolt on the back like ASRock, but they give you things like, for instance, look at how they give you like 3 X16 slots. So the first two are wired. The top one is wired by 16, obviously, but then the second one is wired by 8, and it's a Gen 5. But then what's interesting is the third one that they give you is a X4 PCI Gen 5 that goes directly to the CPU. So all three of the expansion slots on the Ace and the Godlike go to the CPU. So I think they're the only one that I know of that does that. I think Asus, I'm checking my notes here. Yeah, Asus, so even the Asus Extreme, the by 4 slot at the bottom is a PCI Gen 4 slot through the chipset. I think it's through the downstream chipset. So the second one, not the first one. I could be wrong, but they don't expose their layout, so it's hard to tell like where this is wired. Gigabyte actually has the best documentation on their motherboards this time around, but I don't know where exactly this is. I assume that it's in the secondary chipset though, because that's where Gigabyte has their by 4 Gen 4 one that they've got in the master, which is the one down here, this second one. So kind of strange, to be honest. Like they're all kind of in a weird spot the way they've done these motherboards. So actually, let's go ahead and look at Micro Center's page. So Micro Center has, I think they've updated the site now where I think they're showing like all of them. So if we go to, I want to sort by, let's just do X670E. X670E. Let's open up the Crosshair, the Aorus Master, the Meg Ace, and we'll also do the Tai Chi. We'll do the big four. I might cover the Extreme from Asus, and maybe the Gigabyte one, but the Gigabyte Extreme is not that different from the Master. Like the main thing is you get 10 gigabit LAN, and I think there's probably another, like I think they wire one of the PCIe lane. No, actually, they do something a little bit different with the way they've done their USB on the Extreme. But other than that, it's basically the same thing. So the Taichi. So basically, let's look at these four. Yeah, let's just do this. So 700, 500, 800, but this is actually supposed to be 700 as far as I know. I think Micro Center for some reason has this marked up, because if you go look at Newegg's website, Newegg shows the Ace for $699, so I'm not sure why they're doing that. And then you've got Taichi for same as the Master. So, you know, when I went in there on Tuesday, I was like, okay, do you guys have the Ace? Because it wasn't listed on their site. Like, this didn't show up on the site at all at the time. So I was thinking maybe they have them in the back, right? And so I might be lucky. But unfortunately, they didn't have the Ace, which in my mind is the best X670E motherboard. It's the right balance between, it's still super expensive, but it hits all the right boxes, except it's missing Thunderbolt. So if you want Thunderbolt, you have to go with, or if you want USB 4, you have to go with either Asus or ASRock. You could also go Gigabyte, but you have to have the add-in card. So Gigabyte is kind of weird. So, but back to my story, right? Like, I wanted the Ace, they didn't have it. I couldn't wait because I wanted to buy Ryzen day one. So, and I also wasn't really sure like what the supply of the motherboards were gonna be like, because I was so, you know, conditioned by the way things were from the pandemic days of, you know, like scalpers just buying up everything, RTX cards vanishing instantly. If you're trying to buy any of this stuff online, PS5s constantly being scalped. So I wasn't sure what the availability of these were going to be like. So I was like, oh man, I got to buy something now. So, and you don't have the Ace, so that's unfortunate. So I was thinking, okay, what do they have? Well, they've got the Crosshair. They have lots of Crosshair, and Crosshair is good, but it doesn't have the right lane allocations for, like, you can't run an Elgato 4K 60 off of the bottom PCIe slot. You have to run it off of the second Gen 5 slot, which basically means your GPU is going to be cut to X8, which I didn't want to do that, so the Crosshair is basically a no-go. And the Extreme does check all the boxes, but the Crosshair Extreme is $1,000, and I'm like, I don't think I want to spend more money on the motherboard than the CPU. So that kind of like shot Asus out of, or crossed Asus out of the list for me. So then I kind of had to look at what was left. So there was no Ace. Crosshair was out. I mean, it was there, but, you know, I'm not going to buy it. So that left the Aorus Master, which they had like 5 of them, and the Taichi, which I think they had like 11 of them or something. So ultimately, it came down between, like, do I actually need the Thunderbolt, or do I actually want my my GPU to run at X16 in the top slot, and also use the capture card in the X4 slot? So ultimately, what ended up happening was I didn't go with the Taichi. I almost did, but I chose not to go with the Taichi because it didn't have any, like, if you look on here, there's no third PCIe expansion slot. So that was kind of the deal breaker there. But other than that, though, like this board, like Wendell's done a couple of videos. Wendell from Level 1 Techs, by the way. He's done a couple of videos on the Taichi. I think he also has a new video up on the Crosshair. But this board is actually pretty good. Like, I'm surprised. It has 8 SATA. I think 2 of them are shared with something, like a header or some like a USB header or something. I could be wrong, but the Taichi is kind of a pretty solid board. Unless you're wanting to run like a lot of expansion, then it's kind of weird. Because, I mean, you can run a bifurcated like 8x8 for like 2 additional M.2s in the second PCIe slot, and then your GPU will run at X8, which is totally fine, because that's exactly what I would have to do if I was on the Ace from MSI. But ultimately, I ended up going with the Aorus Master. So this is the board that I actually picked up. So as I said at the beginning of the stream, I got the box right here for those that are wondering. So there we go, X670E Aorus Master. So this is the board that we are streaming off of right now, with, of course, the Ryzen 9 7950X. So I got those, and we're running with this with the DDR5 G-Skill Flare X memory, again from Micro Center. They are giving this stuff away for free if you purchase a Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9 while supplies last. So definitely take advantage of that. This is an amazing value because it allows you to basically upgrade to Ryzen 7000 without having to pay for memory. And I know DDR5 memory is an expensive thing to buy right now. So really, really good deal. Basically, that's making Micro Center like some loyal customers, like doing stuff like that. So, and the cool thing about it is, they didn't have that promotion available on launch day. I actually went to Micro Center earlier today and asked them if they could retroactively grant me the free Flare X memory, 32 gigs of memory for free, like basically tag it on to the purchase that I did on launch day, and they were nice enough to do that. So that makes a happy customer from me. So I'll definitely be shopping with them again in a couple of days, probably like a week and a half. Basically, when is the Intel launch? So basically, yeah, a week and a half. I'm gonna be getting the ARC A770 from them on the day that the RTX 4090 comes out, assuming that they actually have stock of the Intel GPU. But so I went with the Aorus Master. So a couple of interesting things to point out. The top heatsink for the Gen 5 SSD, or the M.2, is very, very tall and very thick. And my only concern was, would my Noctua NHD 15 fit on top of the, like, would it have clearance issues with the heatsink that's like down there? So luckily there was nothing, like it fit perfectly, so I didn't have to do anything. And the thing is, Noctua hadn't validated the Aorus Master at the time when I bought this board, so it was kind of a gamble, but it all worked out. So they do kind of gimp you on the integrated audio, like you don't have the 5 and 7.1 analog plugs. You can do that via optical audio out. You could also use a USB DAC. I know the Aorus Extreme does include the DAC, the external DAC, so that's really nice. So that's another good upgrade that you get if you're going with the Extreme. But it's $700, right? So it's basically the same amount of money as the Hero, which is kind of strange because I think the Hero should have been priced at $500, right alongside the Master. And I also kind of think the Meg from MSI should also be priced lower. I think they're too expensive. But in terms of the specs, though, you know, like, it's got everything that I need for now, at least. Like, it has the M.2s. The one thing weird about Gigabyte, and I noticed this about them last year with Alder Lake, was they kind of abandoned like any sort of like possibility of doing multi-GPU. Not that it's actually relevant, but the way that they've allocated the second and the third PCIe slots, they're basically running off of the chipset. So you really only get the top slot to the CPU, and that's an X16 Gen 5. Your second slot on the board is PCIe 4 by 4. So if you have a Elgato 4K capture card, or if you have an AverMedia capture card like me, you would have to plug it into the second PCIe slot. You could also do like a single Gen 5, not Gen 5, you could do a single M.2 Gen 4 add-in card on that as well. And then the bottom slot is the really strange one. So the third slot, which is physically an X16 expansion slot, but it's electrically an X2 slot, and it's a PCIe 3.0 slot. So that's kind of where you'd put an older capture card, maybe something like an AverMedia Live Gamer 2, or an older Elgato Pro. Basically the 1080p 60 or older capture cards would go down there. I can't think of anything else that would go in there, unless you had a strange like PCIe SSD add-in card that could support an X2. But remember that it has to be an X2, so it's kind of limited. Because I was thinking, oh, you could plug in a Wi-Fi card, but then I realized, well, why would you do that? Because I mean, you would never do that on this board because this board already has built-in Wi-Fi 6E. So yeah, and the thing too is with Gigabyte is the actual the LAN and the Wi-Fi on the Aorus Master is Intel-based networking, which is funny because it's like it's an AMD CPU, but you're getting Intel networking, which is really strange because AMD did partner with, I forgot who it was, I think it was MediaTek or somebody. AMD actually does have Wi-Fi 6E native now. They have their own chip, their own solution, which the Ace does actually have. So like if we go here to specifications, we look on the Ace, on MSI's webpage for the Ace, and we go to, you get the Marvell Aquantia 10 gig. So you do get 10 gig networking on the Ace, which is really, really nice. And that's another reason why I think it's sort of justified above what the Aorus Master is charging, or what Gigabyte's charging for the Aorus Master. But you know, your wireless and your Bluetooth is actually AMD Wi-Fi 6E, which I was kind of interested to try out and see like how that compares. But Intel's networking is very, very solid. The drivers on that are very, very good, better than any of like the Realtek NICs that I've used in the past. So yeah, but I was keen to kind of test this out. So this is another thing that I thought was kind of interesting about the MSI boards. So they did actually go with AMD for the networking, for at least for the wireless and Bluetooth. So that's kind of all I had to say on the launch. Overall, it was pretty good. I just kind of wish that they had the Ace at launch. I don't know if I'll get it. I kind of think now I'm kind of set with Gigabyte now on this course. Like, we're basically all in on Gigabyte this time around, which is weird because the funny thing is, like, for Alder Lake's launch, I ended up getting a Gigabyte motherboard because when I went in to get Alder Lake, I didn't really care, like, what motherboard brand I went with because it had been so long since I had ran an Intel system. Like, my last Intel system before Alder Lake was Haswell back in 2013. Which is like 9 years ago. So I was thinking like, that was an MSI motherboard. So I didn't really know what they had. And the other thing too was I didn't want to buy DDR5 because last year DDR5 was insanely expensive. It was like 3 to 4 times as much as DDR4 for the equivalent type of like performance tiers. It was like, no, I don't want to do that. So and there was no incentives for the resellers like Micro Center at the time to offer free DDR5. Like they weren't doing the promotions like they have now, where if you buy Ryzen 9 or Ryzen 7, you get free 32 gigabytes of DDR5 Expo rated memory. They didn't do that with Intel. Like, if you wanted DDR5 and you were gonna go to Alder Lake, you had to fork out a ton of money. And the other thing too was the DDR5 motherboards were just as expensive as the ones that we're seeing here with AMD. Like the Intel boards, the Z690 boards, were just as bad in terms of the price as these boards are on the Ryzen 7000. That plus you had to buy DDR5, which was even more expensive than it is now. It was like twice as much as it is now. So yeah, it was not easy. Alder Lake was arguably what made Alder Lake viable was backwards compatibility with DDR4. And in my mind, I still think that that is kind of going to be the Achilles heel for AMD's 7000 series. It's not going to be the motherboards, because a month from now, B650 is going to be out, and that's basically going to cancel out the argument of, oh, the platform's too expensive. I think the only thing that's going to be holding it back is the DDR5 exclusivity. Having to buy new memory and then render your old memory as completely irrelevant is going to be kind of a tough sell, compared to the competition, because with Intel you have a choice. You can go with DDR4 or you can go with DDR5, and that's exactly what I did. Last year I ended up buying just a DDR4 gigabyte gaming X. Like, we can actually look for it here, right? Like well, let's not get rid of this page. Let's get rid of the crosshair because we're not going to go back to this one. Z690 Gaming X DDR4. I mean, if it even shows up. Okay, we might have to search by Intel motherboards. And we're going to go by Z690. Search by gigabyte. Here it is. So this is the motherboard that I bought for Alder Lake. This is what I'm running my 12700K on. So DDR4. Now, here's the thing that people are like, oh, well, it's so much value. You can carry over your DDR4. Yes, but you'll still feel like a second-class citizen. If you go to Intel, if you go to 12th gen or soon to be 13th gen, and you carry over your DDR4, and you're coming over from like a flagship board or like an upper tier board, like maybe an X370 or a Z390, or any of those boards for the last 3 to 5 years, or maybe even older. Like, if it's even older, like if it's pre-DDR4, then I don't really think there's a point in sticking with DDR4, to be honest. I would just go to DDR5, and that just completely cancels out the whole Intel value equation, if that's the case. Like, anybody who's on, like, Haswell, Broadwell, FX Bulldozer, Nehalem, Sandy Bridge, Ivy, all the old stuff that's DDR3. If you're on a DDR3 system and you're considering upgrading this year or next year, it's basically going to be a pick and choose between AMD or Intel. There's nothing. You completely ignore the DDR4 from Intel because it's like there's no point. Because what I mean by this is you'll feel like a second-class citizen. First of all, there are no DDR4 12th gen boards that have the debug LED. Not a single one. And that was the most annoying thing, because I typically never buy a motherboard that does not have the 7-segment display for the debug. So this motherboard that you're looking at here, the Gigabyte Z690 DDR4 for 12 gen, this is the board that I have. This is the first ever motherboard that I purchased that didn't have a debug LED. I couldn't believe it, but it's like, I didn't want to buy DDR5, so I didn't have a choice. No DDR4 Intel board for Alder Lake has the debug. It's really, really annoying because you have no idea what's happening when you're doing the initial boot. You're just kind of sitting there with your fingers crossed, hoping that it's going to post. So there's nothing to look at. There's there's like a red LED that just stays lit until it finally like goes off and either comes up as white, then you know that you're good, or you wait for the little speaker to beep so you know it's alive. But I hate building with boards that don't have 7-segment Dr. Debug displays. It's super, super annoying. For some reason, those things have become an upper class, higher tier enthusiast sort of feature now. Because, things like the Asus X670E Pro Art Creator motherboard, it's a $500 motherboard from Asus, doesn't even have the debug display. It's kind of disgusting. So, yeah, that's just what it is. So, it's funny because it's like, this is what I'm running on Intel, and I plan to run the 13900K off of this ghetto DDR4 motherboard. The ZC. I'm not buying a Z790 motherboard. Those things are a scam. Like, there's no point. So, unless you don't have one of these. But then I'd probably consider those over these. But even then, like, these will still work, but you just better hope that the BIOS that ships with these on day one can support the 13th gen, which may or may not be guaranteed depending on how long these have been sitting on the shelf. But yeah, it's like I'm using this with like a soon-to-be 260 watt PL2 CPU with this ghetto motherboard, and then like the Ryzen motherboard is sitting on like this massive VRM. So it's weird. It's like never would I have expected to see the day where my main PC lineups would just be all Gigabyte boards. I never thought Gigabyte. I don't think they're bad. I'm not saying Gigabyte's bad. I just never thought of Gigabyte as like a brand that I would build my main PC on. Like, it's typically, I would recommend this for people I know, but for my own use case, I wouldn't see myself using this board. I would typically go with like MSI, but it's weird. Like, these were available, so this is what I ended up getting. It's funny how Intel's LGA, the latch faces down, and then AMD's one faces up. It's kind of funny how they're just the opposites like that. But yeah, I guess for the stream, if there are any viewers in the chat, if you guys have any questions on, like, if you're thinking of upgrading, if you want my recommendation for a motherboard, just let me know, and I'll just ask you, like, what type of use case, what sort of use case are you doing? It's all gonna boil down to use case. Like, if you're doing, if you're trying to like capture like console gameplay from like a PS5, you're gonna need something like this, or something that has like a by 4 electrical PCIe slot on the lower side that doesn't have to take away lanes from your GPU, because that's never ideal. The weird thing with Gigabyte that I noticed is that they've condensed their lineup, but they also do not offer motherboards, at least at launch. They don't offer motherboards that split the top X16 PCIe lanes into like an 8x8 between the top slot and the second slot. All their motherboards only come with a single X16 slot to the CPU, which is the top one in white there on the screen, and then the two lower ones are chipset PCIe slots. So it's strange. Like, they don't have the by 8x8 capability. They're not doing the splitter config, which is what MSI and Asus are doing, and I think ASRock also does it. I think on the Tai Chi. Yeah, I think ASRock is doing it too. So there's a YouTuber, Oaken. Shout out to Oaken Glass. Oaken Glass has a very, very good spreadsheet that goes over all the different like X670E and X670 motherboards, like all the main ones that are available at launch. He has a very, very good breakdown of, the PCIe 5, the PCIe 4, the M.2s, the USBs, which ones have Thunderbolt, which ones have USB 4, which ones have, the by 8x8 split on the top, the first and the second slots, which ones have, PCI Gen 4 expansion slots, which ones are just Gen 3 based. Because the thing with these consumer mainstream, I'll call them consumer grade chipsets, which is basically the X670E, they anytime the motherboard comes with something fancy, like for instance USB 4, so 40 gig USB or Thunderbolt capability, like on the ASRock Tai Chi, like we'll just look at the ASRock Tai Chi. So this board actually has, it's not qualified Thunderbolt via Intel, but they do have the 40 gigabit USB 4, which does support the Thunderbolt, which means that ASRock has enabled something called USB tunnel, or not USB, PCIe tunneling for Thunderbolt signals. So that way it should, in theory, work, but it kind of depends on what sort of peripheral that you're plugging into the port, because it's supposed to work, but because it's not really validated by Intel, I don't know, it's going to be kind of iffy. So you're kind of taking your chances when you're doing stuff like that with these consumer grade desktops like this, and that's kind of why it's kind of a bummer that Threadripper Pro is now Workstation exclusive, and we currently don't really have any what I consider true HEDT offerings from either AMD or Intel. Intel kind of abandoned HEDT quite a while ago, actually. Like anyone who remembers X299 was Intel's last HEDT platform. I think what ended up happening for system integrators like Puget Systems, I think they had to start selling you like Xeon-based solutions. Basically like the budget line servers, like the lower tier servers, in order to replace the lack of like an X299 solution from Intel. Now Threadripper was there, obviously, X399 was there, and then it got replaced by TRX40, and then TRX40, which was basically Ryzen 3000 or Threadripper 3000. Then they kind of went away and never really did anything with that. Like AMD likes to tout that, oh well, AM4, we support the socket for so long. That's great for the consumers, but that's not really that great for the professionals, because prosumer HEDT market, Threadripper 3000 was kind of the only CPU on that socket, because X399 was Threadripper 1000 and Threadripper 2000, but then after that, like, they changed the socket to TRX40, and then that's like its own thing, and then that kind of went away, and then they launched earlier this year. They launched the WRX80, which is the Workstation Threadripper 5000, which is amazing for productivity, but it is for a while it was OEM exclusive. So first Lenovo had it with the Think Station, and then I think Dell has one now, and then I don't know if HP has one yet, but you can actually buy you can actually get them now if you wanted to build your own WRX80. So you can actually get them. So like the Asus Sage WRX80E Sage, this is an example of a workstation class platform. So just by looking at it, just by looking at the number of X16 expansion slots on there, the amount of SATA on the right side, you got the debug LED, everything's there. I see additional like 8 pins for extra CPU power. All kind of dongles in the bottom right. So this is basically a true workstation class. You got dual 10 gig LAN. You've got, the BIOS flashback, clear CMOS, Wi-Fi 6, 10 gigabit USB-C, 20 gigabit USB-C, and a bunch of 10 gig USB Type A, and the full 7.1 or the 5.1 with the digital SPDF out, or the optical audio. So this basically has it all, and it looks like it has active cooling on the I/O as well. So this is what they're lacking for the HEDT sector, because this is not HEDT. This is workstation. So the hierarchy goes like this. I've said this in a previous stream. Someone kind of asked me, what's better than like Ryzen 7000 and Intel Alder Lake. So there's a lot of stuff that's better. So this is better, and then there's like things that are above this, but then there's things that are supposed to be below this, but are not really there anymore. So if that makes sense. So we'll go with the tier system. So the bottom tier is basically, we'll ignore like small mobile devices like iPads and tablets. That's what I consider like trash tier. So you have laptops and notebooks, which is kind of the bottom tier performance-wise. And that includes like gaming laptops. Gamer laptops, which I'll never buy because I think they're a joke. Those things are also bottom tier. Then you have mainstream desktop. So mainstream desktop, B650, then you have X670, and then now X670E. So all three of those, regardless of how different they are from each other, they're all in the same tier. They're all basically mainstream consumer desktop. And then above that, you have what historically is called HEDT, which stands for high-end desktop. So that's where Threadripper sits. That's where Intel's, equivalent big core stuff used to be, which are kind of dead now. And then, but it would be nice if they come back, and it would be nice if Threadripper comes back too. Then after HEDT, you have Workstation. What we're looking at on screen right now, this is Workstation. So Workstation, this is for somebody who maybe is doing Maya 3D, that they do it all day, or someone who's running like CAD simulations, or maybe you're a data scientist, maybe you're somebody who's doing like machine learning, you're doing a lot of stuff with tensor cores, you're running tensor flows with a bunch of like what used to be Quadro cards but are now NVIDIA RTX A6000 or A1000 or A100 or A40s. These are the sort of things that would go in this sort of thing, this sort of tier of product, like the Quadro. Professional stuff, Radeon Pro would also fit in this segment. If you're buying from an OEM like Lenovo, if you look at what they offer in the configuration for the ThinkStation, it's typically either an RTX like Quadro equivalent, or maybe a Radeon Pro, like a WX6800 or something, or even multiple cards, because a lot of the software that the average user for this sort of platform would use can benefit from the parallelism of the abundance of PCIe lanes. So you can run multiple GPUs, you can run multiple like I/O, you can do lots of storage. It's almost like a mini server, or it's like one step away from being a full-on server. So then above Workstation, you have server. So that's where Epic, that's where Xeon, that's where like data center is at. Those things run 24/7. Those things run game servers, like Riot's servers for League of Legends, Square Enix's servers for Final Fantasy XIV. They run on that tier of hardware, so that's like the server tier. And then the only thing above the server tier, which it's kind of like there's an overlap. The only thing that's above server is what I consider enterprise data center, or cloud service like AWS, Microsoft Azure, basically the big cloud providers. But really, in essence, all those things are just massive entities of hundreds and thousands of servers, and everything is all kind of existing in a virtualized environment at that point. So that's kind of the top, the highest tier. And then of course you have like these weird one-offs, like these research supercomputers and things of that nature. But those are more of like another sort of niche aggregation of this sort of compute power. So I guess that kind of like sums up what is above AMD Ryzen 7000 series. So you guys can see there's a lot more stuff actually up there. So we like to tout that the Ryzen 9 7950X is the fastest CPU in the world. Yeah, but it really only depends on it. It's kind of you take that with an asterisk next to it, because it's like, well, maybe in a few lightly threaded kind of workloads and some games, but the reality is there's like a lot of different stuff out there that's a lot faster than that. So anyway, I don't see any questions. The chat has been very, very quiet. No one said anything all stream, and I've been talking for 53 minutes. So I guess the only thing I'm going to do before I get on out of here is I'm just going to go over like the teething issues that I've experienced with being an early adopter of Ryzen 7000. So I'm just going to point all this stuff out here. I'm just going to lay it all out so people know it's not a super smooth experience. Overall, it is very smooth. There's a couple of things, and I don't know if this is particular to my Gigabyte Aorus Master, the firmware having a bug or something, but I'm just going to point out like what I've experienced. So the first thing that I'm going to rant about is the long post time, the long boot time. So for me, I've tested two different memory configurations. So I tested the original, my first set of DDR5 that I purchased a week ago, which is the G-Skill Ripjaws S5. So it's an XMP 3.0 ready. It's got the Intel logo on it. This is a 64 gig kit from G-Skill. This is a 5600 megahertz or megatransfers, cast latency 30 on this. So the primary timings are 30, 36, 36, 89 at 1.25 volts. This is a SK Hynix actual memory DRAM chips they're using in here. So two 32 gig DIMMs. So can you, the question is, can you do 64 gigs on Ryzen 7000? And the answer is yes, you can. These worked perfectly fine, with the one exception being the very, very long post time. So it takes roughly 45 seconds to train the memory, or the IMC, for this particular memory kit. This is an XMP only memory kit. If you boot up with these in the BIOS, it will not have an option for the Expo. It will be XMP only. But that doesn't mean that it won't work. It will load it and it will retrain, and it'll take a while. It'll take about, you know, like 50 seconds or whatever. But then it'll come up and you'll get in, and Windows will be super fast from there. So overall, I do want to go back to running these because these are 64 gig. I want to be on 64 gigs on Ryzen 7000, and I'm just kind of waiting for UEFI updates from Gigabyte at this point to improve memory compatibility. Maybe give us another AGISA update, make the boot times faster or whatever, and we'll go from there. The other memory kit that I have tested, which is what I'm running right now, is the G.Skill Flare X5. This is a 32 gig kit, so these are two 16 gig DIMMs. This is what we're streaming on right now. This was actually free from Micro Center. If you live near Micro Center, I'm going to say this again for those that are tuning in now. Micro Center is currently running a free promotional bundle. If you buy any Ryzen 7 or 9 7000 series processor, so that would be the Ryzen 7 7700X, the Ryzen 9 7900X, or the Ryzen 9 7950X, so this one. Any of those three qualify you for free 32 gigabytes of G.Skill DDR5 5600 mega transfers. It is roughly a 200. It says 250, 249.99 on the back. But if you were to buy these normally, Micro Center has them on sale for $189. But you get them free if you buy a Ryzen processor, so a Ryzen 7000 7 or 9 processor. So very, very good. I got these free. I am using them right now because I wanted to see, like, is the post time faster with an actual Expo memory kit. So when you load these in the BIOS, they will have an Expo memory kit. In fact, Gigabyte's Aorus Master actually will load, it will train, and it will automatically pull these up, assuming that the IMC trains on the initial run and gets into the BIOS with the 5600 mega transfer. So that's really nice because that was different from my XMP based kit, which I actually had to manually select the XMP profile to get those to tune, but they did work. So the difference between Expo and XMP is XMP took me about 45 seconds to post versus 30 to 35 seconds with the Expo. So I definitely recommend, if you're looking at what type of memory to buy, I highly, highly recommend making sure that you buy something with the AMD Expo logo on the actual packaging. I can't stress that enough. It makes loading the profile and getting into Windows a breeze. It also has the fastest post time. And currently, like, you know, half a minute is not fast at all. I still consider that unacceptable. But these are the sort of early adopter issues that you have to live with if you decide to pick up Ryzen 7000 now, like during the early launch period. So that's what I would recommend. One more thing I wanted to go over, because the people in the chat are probably... I do see viewers, but no one really wants to say anything. So I guess people haven't picked up, or either they're on the fence about it or not, or whatever. But anyway, I wanted to kind of go over this. So this is a good table from G.Skill that goes over what the actual, like what is supported. So we'll kind of blow this up on the stream so people can see it. So this is the launch specifications, right? So the one you get for free from Micro Center is the lowest tier one, you know, but it's free, so you can't really complain. And the nice thing about it is it's not bad. It's It's DDR5 5600. If you want to overclock it, go ahead. It is Samsung based memory. I'll just tell you guys right now. The kit that I was using at launch, which is this one, which is it's actually the Ripjaws, but it looks very similar to the Flare X5, is the second from the bottom one here. So my 64, I have a 2x32 kit that I was using on the launch day, but then when I got my free 32 gig kit from Micro Center, it's this 2x16 one here. So this 2x16 one corresponds to this bottom one here. So 36, 36, 36, 89. Anytime you see like all three of the first numbers the same, like 36, 36, 36, or if it was like 40, 40, 40, or well, 40, 40, 40 is not necessarily. But basically what I'm trying to tell you guys is the easiest way to predict if your memory dims or your memory is Samsung is if all three of those numbers are the same. There's a very high chance, it's not 100% guaranteed, but there's a very high chance that it's Samsung memory. So again, 36, 36, 36, 89. So this is an Expo rated kit from Micro Center. It's a G.Skill Flare X5. This is a Samsung based kit. Now the second one here, the 30, 36, 36, 89. This is probably going to be a Hynix based kit. My Ripjaws, this is a 64 gig kit, which has the exact same timings. It's 30, 36, 36, 89. This is a SK Hynix based kit. So anything that's above 6,000, so if we're talking like 6400, 6200, 6600, those are all pretty much going to be Hynix mostly, where you're going to have the primary CL, the cast latency number is going to be a number that's quite a bit lower than the other primary timings. So for example, if you look at this top end SKU here, you have 30, 38, 38, 96. This it's a 2x16. This is most likely an SK Hynix memory kit. It could be Samsung, but it's most likely it's going to be Hynix, especially if it's pushing 6,000 or above. It's probably going to be Hynix. And then the other one that could probably be Hynix is this 28, 34, 34, 89. This is a very, very good low latency kit. The only reason why, well, the only thing is this is probably going to be very expensive. Like we're talking like, especially if you're doing 64 gigs, but I would say like this is probably like $250 for a 32 gig kit with these timings. And the other negative aspect of running the very low latency is your memory voltage. The VDD is going to be pretty high. It's going to be like 1.35 volts. In some cases, these 6,000 megahertz or megatransfers SKUs are going to be like pushing 1.4 volts for that cast latency 30. So, and I honestly don't feel comfortable running 1.4 volts on DDR5. I just don't think it's been out in the market long enough to test the longevity. If we go back to DDR4 typically ran at, so the base JEDEC was 1.2, and then the XMP was typically 1.35 on DDR4. And what I know of DDR5 is the JEDEC DDR5 is 1.1 volt, and if we're talking XMP, and in you know, by analysis of that, also with Expo, we're talking 1.25 volts or maybe 1.2 volts, but typically 1.2, 1.25 is kind of the XMP rated voltage. And then anything above that is definitely like well into overclock territory. So if you're seeing DDR5 kits that are rated for, you know, like DDR5 6000 or DDR5 6400, they're probably pushing like 1.4 volts or at least 1.35 volts. And I just don't really feel comfortable purchasing that. It's like, yeah, you're squeezing out a little bit more bandwidth with those higher frequencies. But at the end of the day, like, I favor stability, 100% stability over like super, super high-end performance. So especially if you're doing something like production or, you know, even like live streaming, you don't want your stream to crash because your memory is unstable, right? Like PC World, they recently, like, they had it was a couple weeks ago, their full nerd episode like crashed in the middle of the stream, or it went down because the system that they were streaming off of literally blue screened. They were running an Alder Lake system, like a 12900K, and it blue screened because the memory wasn't stable. So yeah, that's the reason why I wouldn't really. I don't know. It's cool to tweak it, but what I would rather do is buy like cheaper memory, like a 5600 kit, and try to overclock it to see what I can get in the 6000 realm. And while trying to maintain the 1-to-1 ratio with the U clock and the F clock and the mem clock and all that stuff. So yeah, the other thing too, I will point out, so my experience so far with memory on Ryzen, at least on the Ryzen chip that I have, so far with my Gigabyte Aorus Master, I can't run 64 gig DIMMs. Now, granted, these are XMP DIMMs. They don't have an Expo profile. I can't run these at the rated 5600 speed in a 1-to-1 ratio. Like, I have to run my U clock at half the speed of the mem clock. So it's kind of annoying. And that's because you're kind of giving up performance because you're having to run like in much higher latency. But the nice thing is once you're booted into Windows, it's 100% solid. Like, it's more stable than my Alder Lake system was. And my Alder Lake system at 64 gigs can't run Gear 1 mode. So basically the way I see it is, if you're familiar with Intel's Alder Lake has the same sort of thing where you can run the FSB in a 1-to-1 ratio with the memory. So they call it Gear 1 and Gear 2. Gear 1 is basically the memory clock, and the IMC fabric is basically the same. I don't know exactly what the term is on Intel, but it's basically the equivalent of the Uncore on AMD. Basically, like, Gear 1 means your memory and your, I guess it's the fabric to the IMC is the same clock. But if you can't run stable, like for example with Intel, I can't post at all. Like, if I'm running 64 gigabyte DIMMs or 64 gigabytes of RAM, and I can't post in Gear 1. I have to back it down to Gear 2 to be able to post with 64 gigs, and that's only at 3200 megahertz on DDR4. So either I got a pretty lousy binned Alder Lake, which mine is actually one of the launch ones, so I can actually run AVX 512 if I had an MSI Unify motherboard, but unfortunately I don't, so that's kind of a moot point. But I'm just kind of throwing it out there. So it's like same problem that I've ran into on Ryzen. Like, unfortunately, with 64 gigs, I can't run without overvolting. I can't run U clock equal to mem clock. I have to run the divider. I have to run it at half the speed for 64 gigs, but it's 100% stable. Because even with Gear 2 mode, early days of Alder Lake, I would still like randomly crash playing like Endwalker. After playing the game for like 5 hours, it would just randomly crash the game, and I tossed it up to like memory, being unstable. But the nice thing about the Expo rated kit is I can run these at 5600 with the 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm probably going to run these for a while until the next BIOS update. It's a little bit annoying because I don't like being on 32 gigs of RAM. I really, really want to be on 64 gigs of RAM. But that's what you get for being an early adopter, right? So, and I can live with that. The only other problem that I've run into is when I put the computer to sleep, when I wake it up, the AverMedia 4K capture card, which is located in the second, where is it? What happened to the master? It's in the second X4 slot. It's the PCIe 4.0 X4 slot. I have my AverMedia 4K capture card, 4K 60 capture card in that slot. When I wake up the PC from sleep, 80% of the time, the card doesn't wake up with the system, and it just stays off. And I'll get a notification from Rec Central, and OBS will no longer detect the capture card. It's like it's gone. It's like someone ripped it out of the system. So I know that's a UEFI BIOS bug. I don't know if that's specific to Gigabyte or if that's going to have to be fixed in an AMD Agisa update. But that's just something I'm throwing out there. If you're going to pick up one of these systems, if you're looking at like streaming, you have to be really careful in what motherboard you choose, because not all motherboards are created equal. They're all very, very different, and I think they're all, not only are they extremely expensive, but they're really tailored for specific use cases, is the way I look at it. Like, for example, ASRock Tai Chi has tons of USB 4 and like support for Thunderbolt and stuff like that. You can't really find that on a lot of the other boards. MSI, by comparison, is the complete opposite. MSI has like no Thunderbolt, no USB 4, not even on the $1,300 Godlike, which is kind of absurd. But what they do give you is things that I feel gamers actually want, which is like proper PCIe slot spacing and actual connectivity. Now, here's a good trivia for people who are probably wondering, like, why is the Godlike so insanely expensive? It's the most expensive motherboard, like $1,300 MSRP. Well, I'll let you guys in a little secret. This is currently the only motherboard that supports SLI. I'll say it again. This is the only SLI-enabled motherboard. Not even the $1,000 ROG Crosshair Extreme can do SLI. Not saying that SLI is relevant anymore, but that's besides the point. The point is, MSI was the only AIB motherboard vendor that ponied up the cash to pay NVIDIA for the license key to unlock SLI on their motherboard. And they only did it for this one, which is kind of sad, because I think the Ace, if the Ace had SLI, that would be the ace in their sleeve against Asus and all the others. So, but unfortunately, they kind of failed there and threw it on the $1,300 flagship that probably isn't going to sell that much, but, you know, it is what it is. So this is the only one right here. Where's GPU? No, this is Godlike. Wait, did they take it away? Last I checked, it said it supports SLI. Did they like not do? Did they just get rid of SLI at the last minute? Expansion slots, it doesn't say. Well, it used to say it. Now it doesn't say it, and this is the Godlike. It did say supports AMD multi-GPU and NVIDIA SLI. I can guarantee that it said that. If they took it away, then I might have to email their support team to ask about that, because that's kind of one of the only reasons why I can see them trying to justify the absurd cost of this motherboard, or the price of this motherboard. The other thing too that's nice about MSI is they have proper spacing. You know, like the Ace has got, you know, like if you put a GPU in the second slot here, like if you're trying to do like Crossfire or something, or just multi-GPU for, you know, maybe you're trying to run like a mini render farm or something, you know, the second GPU can go here, and provided it's a double slot card, not like a triple slot card. Don't try to put like a 4090 in here. That would be kind of dumb. But, you know, you have enough space to put like a Elgato capture card down here, and it'll work, because this is actually wired to the CPU. The nice thing about the MEG line in particular is that all three of their PCIe expansion slots go to the CPU. They're all Gen 5. MSI Meg is the only option if you're going for like full-on PCI expansion, because they give you the correct slot spacing and the actual slots that people would actually want, whereas everyone else kind of went with random other things. Like Tai Chi went with a bunch of USB 4, and that's fine, because, you know, some people, I feel like this is better for a semi-prosumer, almost like a mini HEDT kind of build. I think the Tai Chi is actually a really good choice for that. The Master is also very good for the same sort of thing. Like, the cool thing about the Master is that you actually have a Thunderbolt 4 header on the front over here. A lot of people don't really know that. It actually shows right here, Gigabyte add-in card connector. you can actually run a Thunderbolt add-in card off of that. Like the header plugs in there, you have to plug in the Thunderbolt card into the second PCIe slot. So for me, that's a no-go because I gotta run my AverMedia card on his slot. But you know, it's nice to have. I mean, at least it's there. Versus like MSI, which completely ignores USB 4 and Thunderbolt in favor of just giving you more PCI 5 connectivity. So it's very interesting. You know, it's actually quite fascinating. Like if you're like a tech enthusiast and you like to boil over all the little details of how all the motherboards are different, I would say that I've never been this excited about like comparing motherboards. I've never actually like wanted to go that in depth with motherboard comparisons before, but it's fascinating because I think that's a testament to the success of AMD's new chipset, right? Like the X670, the X670E, and then soon we'll be looking at the B650. These are very interesting chipsets because they're not quite HEDT, but they give you a lot of lanes for what's considered a mainstream product. So there is still a lot of resource. You know, they gotta decide. Like the motherboard manufacturer has to decide. Like, do I want USB 4? Okay, if I put USB 4, then I have to take away a PCIe slot. You know, they have to kind of pick and choose. Or if they're gonna do more than like one Gen 5 SS or M.2, then you have to like pull resources that you would have put somewhere else. So it's kind of like they're trying to guess, you know, what does a gamer want? What does a creator want? What does the average user actually do with their computer, you know, in terms of expansion, expandability, storage, production, like that kind of stuff. Like audio DACs. Gigabyte's pretty good there, although they kind of gimp you on the lack of like actual analog 5.1 across their entire lineup, which is very, very lame. But you know, the Extreme comes with an external DAC, so it's interesting. It's fascinating how they've kind of all gone off and done their own thing. And it used to be like pretty much all the motherboards at the top end were basically the same thing. They all just had different RGB layouts and logos and patterns and stuff. Now with this new platform, they're very, very different. Like the Master is very different from the Ace, and the Ace is very different from the Crosshair, and the Crosshair is very different from the Taichi. So it's nice to see all these like flagship, I guess not necessarily flagship because the Extremes are pretty much the flagships, but the actual one that someone would be willing to spend a lot of money on, right? Like I'm more likely to buy a Aorus Master than I am to buy an Aorus Extreme, or I'm more likely to buy a Crosshair Hero than I would ever buy like a Crosshair Extreme, if that makes sense, right? So I feel like these named SKUs, Master, Ace, Crosshair, Hero, and Taichi, these are kind of like the characters, if you will. Like they're the characters of the story, and it's like you get to choose which one is your favorite. It's interesting to see how they've all changed over time. Alright, so we don't have anybody commenting. Let me just do like a quick test to see if the chat is working, because I haven't seen it come through. Okay, no, it's there, but no one said anything. So, alright, well, I guess I've talked for over an hour. We've been streaming now for like an hour and 18 minutes, and no one's really said anything, so I guess there's not a lot of questions about the Ryzen 7000 launch. I'm probably going to test eco mode. I've basically been running the thing stock since day one. I've just been messing with memory and trying to check every day for like a BIOS update from Gigabyte to hopefully improve the post time so I can go back to 64 gigabytes of memory. But it'll be interesting to see. It's just a great time right now to be a hardware enthusiast. We've got lots of new product launches coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we have, on October 12th, we have the NVIDIA RTX 4090. I will not be covering that product because I don't plan on buying one of those. I think it's very expensive, and I don't think it's going to be worth it if you already have an RTX 30 series or if you have an AMD 6000 series GPU. But I will be getting the Intel Arc A770. I've been talking about the Intel Arc on and off for pretty much all year. I've been waiting for that GPU. I plan to pair that up with the Alder Lake 12700K. And then I will also try to test it with my new Ryzen 7000 series CPU and see how well it does in an AMD-based system. And then, of course, we have Intel 13th Gen, which is... I'm not super excited about it. It's basically an iteration of Alder Lake. So, you know, they essentially, at the top end... Well, across the entire stack, they basically bolted on more E-cores, which is... You know, if you're an enthusiast, you care more about performance than efficiency. So it's like they're kind of, it's still an eight performance core at the flagship, at the top of the line. So like the 13900K is still going to be 8 performance cores, but now they're giving you 16 P cores. So they're basically effectively doubling, the E core count, which, you know, 16 E cores. You know, if you're on Windows 10, that doesn't mean a whole lot, to be honest, and I'm still on Windows 10, so not too enthusiastic about that, but I probably will pick it up, though. I'll probably get a 13900K. It might force me to upgrade to Windows 11, I don't know. At this point, Intel is really, really hoping people are on Windows 11, because I think that if you are at the slightest chance considering going with Intel 12th Gen, or Intel 13th Gen, I'll just say this. You better be on Windows 11, or you better be ready to go to Windows 11, because Alder Lake on Windows 10 is not a very good experience. All you got to do is check your task manager. You'll constantly see activity in the E-cores, and it's like, why is there high utilization on the E-cores? You know, is this system like compromised? It's just gonna feel weird, and then like the fan will ramp up and down like crazy because the E-cores all will just get assigned one thing, and then they'll all ramp, then they'll all drop, and they'll eventually Windows 10 will be smart enough to push that onto a P-core, and the P-core will just get it done like super quick. So, you know, these sort of weird kind of the big core, little core architecture wasn't really thought out too well when it came to Windows 10. That was kind of in Intel's rearview mirror when they were building Alder Lake. Or at least the Golden Cove and Gracemont. And then soon they'll have the Raptor Cove to replace Golden Cove. But, you know, I don't know. I think I'll probably get the 13900K just because that way I'll have 2 desktops that are both 32 thread and that are both modern. Because... You know, the AMD computer I have right now, you know, this is what, like the Ryzen 9 7950X. This is 16 core, 32 thread. The Intel 13900K is going to be considered a 24 core, 32 thread, but at the end of the day it's still a 32 thread machine. So to Windows, both the AMD flagship and the Intel flagship will effectively be considered the same thing. But how that will translate into real actual performance, who knows? Because with AMD you have 16 performance cores, with Intel you only have 8, and your E-cores are like 16 E-cores, but you know, E-cores are E-cores, they're like Skylake cores essentially, so which is from 2015. Now granted they're way more efficient, but you know, how is that going to translate? Like on Windows 10, is Windows 10 smart enough to not throw all your game tasks onto on a bunch of E-cores? Like I feel like the 13900K might run into weird issues on Windows 10 where, because 2/3 of the cores are efficiency cores, like I feel like it's far more likely that Windows 10 will randomly assign tasks and put them on the E-cores, and then you'll have issues where like latency will be really weird, and I don't know. I could be overblowing the whole thing. It might be fine. They might have fine-tuned it enough, but I don't know. Like that's gonna be heavily like UEFI processor related to fix that, because Intel's innovation, they talked about an improved thread director, but thread director is exclusive to Windows 11. So it's like, are we gonna, if we're still on Windows 10, are we gonna see any benefit there? I don't know. So in that regard, I do think that the AMD platform seems to be a more solid choice in terms of the performance expectation is not as dependent on the operating system, if that makes sense. But anyway, guys, I guess with that, I'm probably going to go ahead and end the stream. No one's really said anything, which is fine. It is what it is. So that's basically it. One more thing, I just want to reiterate that Micro Center does still have that deal where if you buy a Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9 7000 series processor, you get free 32 gig Expo kit from G.Skill. So, and it's in store. They give it to you right there at the checkout. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed that stream, and I will probably be back next time. We might do another stream on Ryzen, but I think we're probably going to start turning our attention toward Intel now, and we will be back with more discussions like this. So if you like this content, feel free to hit that bell icon or subscribe. It will help me feel more motivated to keep coming back with more content. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.